Well, what's better than a full-size performance vehicle? Here we have the GTO's bigger brother, the Pontiac 2+2, in its second model year. This was the first year that it was its own series separate from the Catalina. The 2+2 was introduced in 1964, and as I said, it was really introduced as the GTO's big brother. It was the full-size vehicle built on General Motors' full-size platform as opposed to the GTO, which was an intermediate vehicle where GM effectively took a intermediate-sized Tempest and then dumped the big 389 cubic inch V8 in it. Now here we have a beautiful 2+2, and it's finished in a color called Samoan Bronze. And if this color does not look familiar to you, it's because it was not a standard color that was offered as part of the Pontiac lineup in 1965. This was actually a Cadillac color. And the owner, or the original person who bought this vehicle, decided to pay about $40 extra to have GM paint it this color from the factory, which was a Cadillac color. It's actually on the window sticker. It says special order paint. And you could do that back then. Now, unfortunately, you're just kind of relegated to the few colors that the OEs offer today, mostly blacks and silvers and whites. Maybe you get lucky with a red and a blue, and pretty much that's it. But Samoan Bronze is a pretty awesome color on this 65 2+2. Now, 1965 was also the first year for this particular body style. The previous generation ran from 1961 to 64, then this one ran from 1965 to 1970. And it's a stacked headlamp beauty. These are my favorite Pontiacs. The stacked headlamps really came in the 1963 model year, and many people will recognize the 1963 Grand Prix perhaps as the best of the 1963 lineup. I think the 65 Grand Prix is also one of my favorites, but this 2+2 is certainly a stunner. Notice the stacked headlamps, and then I love how the fender kind of pulls away from the headlamps, and they have these beautiful nacelles around them that we'll see as we rotate to the front three-quarter view. But you also see up front Pontiac's arrowhead, kind of trademark arrowhead styling with that pointy nose in the middle, a little bit of the W-shaped front end here, and you have the split grille that was characteristic of Pontiacs from 1959 all the way through the end, and only a few Pontiacs didn't have that. But here you have the split in the middle of the grille, and you also have a split horizontally. So a couple different splits to this overall vehicle and the front end design. Let's rotate around now to the front three-quarter view. And in this view, we can really get a sense of how pointy that Pontiac arrowhead is, as well as really seeing those nacelles and the stacked headlamps and the beautiful detailing up front, with that front headlamp that is sitting proud of the lower headlamp, and that whole front end just having this look of leaning forward. It's not straight up and down like it ran into a brick wall, but almost looks like it's about ready to pounce on the car in front of it. Now from this view, you can also see the beautiful way that the top of the fender has that crease line and then kind of drapes over the headlamps. And then you have another feature line below that before the side of the fender kind of comes into the picture. And these 2+2s had those gills behind the front wheels. And of course, the badging, you can see it says 421 there. The 2+2 came standard with a 421 cubic inch 4-barrel V8, making 338 gross horsepower. It sounds like it's quite a bit, and I will say I have a 421 4-barrel in my 65 Bonneville. It is pretty gosh darn fast, but I would suspect that the Catalina was even a little bit faster, has a bit shorter rear end to get it off the line more quickly than my Bonneville that has a pretty lazy, I think, 273 rear end in it. Now let's flip to the other side and take a look at this side view. I think the highlights on this car and in this particular photo are just great. Take a look at that upper feature line that starts all the way at the front of the car, runs all the way back. It's relatively flat with the fender, but then as you get past the door, it kind of kicks up and then over the wheel before it tapers down and the whole rear of the car tapers. General Motors styling vice president Bill Mitchell loved tapered rear ends, and most every vehicle during his tenure from 1959 to 1977 had some sort of a taper to the rear. Not all, but many of them did. I do love that crease that runs the entire length of the car that's below it, kind of midway up the body, just above those so-called gills behind the front wheel there, creating some tension. And then this car displays the so-called Coke bottle design. Notice that the quarter panel kind of kicks up around where the rear quarter glass would be. It also is symmetrical in doing so. The lower also kind of kicks out. And when I say kicks out, I mean not only goes up or down in the case of the lower, but also the body gets fatter as it goes around the rear wheel. That's the characteristics of the Coke bottle design, that you have this flare outboard as well as a flare upward that kind of complements the window graphic or takes the window graphic along with it. And here you have it even further accentuated by the fact that the lower portion of the body here is symmetrical with the upper portion, and I think very tastefully so. Relatively little amount of chrome on the body side here compared to just a few years earlier. Think about a 1958 Pontiac and then think about this 1965. Muted in, more muted in its use of chrome, but certainly not in the beauty of the design that you see here. Now, while that convertible was a Samoan Bronze convertible, I thought I would show this coupe, this Fastback coupe that's a 2+2, because I think you really get the sense for the Coke bottle styling when you have something other than the convertible roofline. The soft top just really doesn't help in terms of showing off that styling theme. But here you can see the rear quarter panel clearly going up and out over the rear wheel, and that's that Coke bottle styling. By the way, I have to say that I love these Fastbacks. This was just a fad during the time frame, and it's rather unfortunate because I think it's a great looking design. But by the end of the 1960s, the fastback trend would be over, and Pontiac would have much stiffer roofs on its coupes. And like I said, I think that it's unfortunate because, well, this is a beautiful view. Notice that out back, the C-pillars are set significantly inboard of the top of the quarter panel, something that you don't see on cars today where, you know, they're kind of trying to use every inch of space and make the maximum use of space on the inside of the car. This clearly would intrude on the passenger compartment to some degree, but it certainly looks good. This particular car also has Pontiac's famous 8-lug wheel on it, and that was a beautiful design and also quite functional. The 8 lugs were where the drum would bolt up to the wheel, and take a look at the inset here. You can see a picture of the 8-lug drum where it's been separated from the wheel. A great looking design, also functional, and I can't think of really any other instances where the brake drum itself is kind of visible from the outside and forms the design. But great idea from Pontiac. Unfortunately, the 8 lugs obviously would only last as long as drum brakes would last. And once those were gone by the late 60s, early 70s, the 8 lugs had also faded away into oblivion. And before moving on, I thought I would share one more picture of a 2+2 coupe from 1965. This one in a beautiful color called Evening Orchid that you don't see very many Pontiacs painted this color. It was also a color for Chevrolet in 1965. I think they had a different name for it, but it was the same paint and just a gorgeous color, kind of a silvery, pinky purple color. I think it looks fantastic on these vehicles overall. Now let's flip to the interior of this 2+2 convertible, because this is also where Pontiacs excelled in the mid-1960s. And I have to think that part of it was because they obviously had talented design teams, but more importantly, the chief designer for Pontiac was a man by the name of Jack Humbert. And he was a master in terms of surfacing on the exterior, and he actually had come up as an interior designer. So rarely in the auto industry does a design team or a particular designer have experience in both exterior and interior design, at least back during this time frame. It was kind of viewed, if you were an interior designer, that you were a bit of a second-class citizen, as the exterior was what drew the customers in. And I think finally the interior designers these days are getting their due. The interior is just as important as the exterior, in some cases, to some customers, maybe even more so, because that's where you sit and spend your time. But back during this time frame, exterior design was where it's at. Nonetheless, Pontiac really put a lot of emphasis on their interiors in the mid-1960s. And you can see some of the beautiful detailing on this 65 2+2. Now, this car has a number of visible options in this picture. First is the center console. That was not standard. You did get bucket seats, but that console is about a $100 option. It also has the custom sports steering wheel, the 3-spoke wheel, and it's a tilt wheel on this car. And you can also tell this car has automatic climate control, because you can see in the dash and the IP to the left of the center vent and the top pad, that's where the sensor sits for the automatic climate control. This would be the first year for automatic climate control for Pontiac after Cadillac introduced it to the industry in 1964. They would have a 1-year exclusive before other General Motors divisions could get it. And here, somebody has opted for automatic climate control. It also has an optional radio. Radios were optional during this time frame. They weren't standard. And this car does have the 2-speed wipers with the washer as well. So lots of options on this particular 2+2 convertible. And I couldn't get a close-up of that particular vehicle and the IP, but here you can see it. This is a different 2+2. Look at the door panel, how intricate it is with those various molded shapes and ribs, the tie-in with the seat theme. This particular car has the deluxe seat belts too, with these beautiful seatbelt buckles that on the top of them, they have the Fisher body emblem on them. They're just a piece of jewelry. Obviously, the custom sports steering wheel is included in this car as well. The RPM gauge near the A-pillar is aftermarket, I should say the tachometer. The gauge that is on the center console is an engine vacuum gauge. That's not a tachometer. I guess it's somewhat helpful. This car does also still have air conditioning too. You can see the vent in the IP top pad. The cars that did not have air conditioning did not have that, nor did they have the so-called crotch cooler vents down below, which you can see one is visible here. And you have what looks like 2 radios. The leftmost one is really the climate control, and Pontiac just styled it to look like a radio. You turn one of the knobs for more heat or more cooling, and the other is to select the fan speed, which is, I don't want to call it automatic, but it does change as you turn the temperature selector. The fan speed will go up or down a little bit depending on if you're at one of the extremes. And of course, you have the 3 gauges that are rotated toward the driver in the circular pods there. Just a beautiful instrument panel, fine detailing all over this interior. This is a Pontiac. This isn't a Cadillac. And I think it's just hard to beat from any car in the 1960s, luxury or otherwise. Frankly, if I were in the market in 1965, I would have bought a top-of-the-line Bonneville, probably with the highest output 421 3.2-barrel, 376 horsepower V8, because I don't think that there was really anything finer in terms of styling or interior appointments. There was no reason to go for a Cadillac. And the Bonneville would have been faster, and I think it even looked better, though the 65 Cadillac is a beautiful car. And before we go to the under hood area, I should point out that this car does have the optional wire wheel discs. Those were a few bucks extra. And it does have the fender skirt option. The fender skirts were not standard on the 2+2s. You had to pay extra for them on the Catalinas as well as the 2+2s. And the buyer here opted for that. And I think it kind of completes the look, it makes that rear quarter look visually larger. And I like that. I think it looks pretty cool. Now let's transition under hood. And I couldn't find a picture of this particular vehicle, standard 421, 338 horsepower, 4-barrel V8. So here's one from a different car. This car obviously does not have air conditioning, where I am showing you the photo here. But I wanted to show it because it did have a unique air cleaner that also the GTO got with its standard 4-barrel, 335 horsepower, 389. This kind of open element air cleaner, very similar to what was used on Corvettes of the era. I think it looks pretty cool. Now, there were 3 engines that you could get in your 2+2. There was a standard 338 horsepower, 421 4-barrel. There was one up from that, the 2-barrel, 356 horsepower, 421. That was basically the same engine, just with a different carburation setup. And it did, I should say, have the same camshaft in it as the 4-barrel 421, but it had slightly higher compression ratio, 10.75 to 1 versus 10.5 to 1 in the 4-barrel 421. So I guess the compression ratio was a little bit higher, but the camshaft was the same. And then the top engine option was a 376 horsepower high output 421 3.2-barrel V8. That one had a different camshaft than the other two and was also a 10.75 to 1 compression ratio engine. So you had 3 different engine options you could get in your 2+2. This is what the standard one looked like. And by the way, if you want to know what Pontiac engine you have under hood, you can look for this 2-letter/digit code that's on the cylinder block on the passenger side just below where the head is. And then that decodes to what type of engine you have. Pontiac V8s that range in size from 326 to 455 cubic inches are all the same physical exterior size. So it's hard to judge what kind of engine that you have, but that 2-letter or digit code is what can help you do that. And here's a look at what the tri-power setup would have looked like on one of these 2+2s. You can see the 3 2-barrel carburetors. The engine runs off of the middle 2-barrel carburetor most of the time, until you really step on it, and then that opens up the 2 outer carburetors. This setup was used by Pontiac through the 1966 model year. Then in 1967, when the Quadrajet carburetor came out, the 3 2-barrels were gone. And 67, the 389 would also be increased in displacement to 400 cubic inches. The 421 would be increased to 428 cubic inches. And those engines are great as well, probably a little bit easier to tune than 3 2-barrel carburetors, which you had to make sure that they stayed in tune really to get optimal performance versus the Quadrajet that really just did a lot of it on its own. So what do you think of this beautiful 2+2 in Samoan Bronze? I have to say this was not a Pontiac color, but for me, it might just be the best color on this car. It fits it so well. And this car, like I said, was ordered by an individual who special ordered that paint. I believe it was even ordered by a GM executive. So that person clearly had knowledge that this was the right color for the car. And like I said, I think it's the best color that you could get on a Catalina or a 2+2 like this. But put a comment in the comment section. Let me know what you think. And is this one of the most beautiful cars of the 60s? I certainly think so. But let me know if you think I'm delusional or I'm right on with that comment. Thanks again for watching.